Richard, can you please tell us about a time when you had to produce high quality results under difficult circumstances?
Thank you. Yes. I'd like to give you an example of a time when I was working for the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Cyprus. My role there was the acting HR manager, and I was leading an HR team of 7 people and reporting directly to the director of administration. During my time as acting HR manager, the mission was asked to organize and host the evacuation of all United Nations personnel from Cairo during the unrest and uprisings there. The operation was split into 3 phases. The first phase was the planning phase. And for me, in my role, it was very important to understand who my key clients were. And they were the other heads of UN agencies on the island whose staff we were evacuating. They were the head of security for the island, who was responsible for the safety and security on the island, and the mission leadership of my own mission, who were responsible for the effective evacuation. During a planning meeting, my role was identified as being in charge of all of the personnel that were being evacuated from Cairo. And my responsibility there was to lead my team into effective and coming up with an effective method of monitoring and tracking all of the people that were evacuated. So what I did was lead the team into developing a database based on all of the passenger manifests. So I had to liaise very closely with the head of security to understand who was on each plane and who was arriving at the airport, and then develop a system that would track them. And
Sorry, I just need to interrupt you a second because I'm not quite sure of the timeline here of the evacuation and the phases that you had for the planning, etc.
okay, we had been told to be on standby to expect an evacuation within 24 hours. And when the evacuation occurred, it was the responsibility of the mission to ensure that the people were received and then sent onwards to their place of recognized residence within 48 hours. So when the call came, we had about 12 hours to do the planning and preparation and make sure that when we went to the airport to receive the evacuees, that everything was in order. Now, the evacuation itself in the airport was the second part of the operation. So my role there was to make sure that the systems that we had in place were effective, that everybody on my team understood that their roles and everyone understood what was expected of them. Communication was key. We needed to make sure that I needed to make sure that all of my team were aware of what to do if there were any problems, that they were aware of where to go for help. I also had to communicate directly with a number of people in the airport. It was my job to find focal points from each agency in the airport. It was also my job to advise the mission representative who was dealing with the immigration authorities in Cyprus to make sure that the representative had all of the correct information that would allow the immigration or the successful immigration of the UN personnel and their dependents, making sure they had visas, making sure they had their UNLPs, making sure that everything was up to date, and being able to advise if there were any problems regarding visas or immigration.
Right. So in addition, I mean, I can understand it's a challenging situation, just the fact that you had that kind of timeline in order to evacuate so many people. Can you explain a little bit more about the challenges, if any, you faced in getting all this data and in giving instructions to your team? Some feel about some of the additional challenges you might have faced?
We had to make sure that everyone was accounted for and that everyone was checked and logged into the database of staff. So I had to make sure that there was a systematic approach. We had, as a team, designed a check-in sheet and a database, and it was my responsibility to make sure that nobody left the airport without having gone through the check-in formalities. This level of planning and being able to organize in this way and predict the movements of people really helped to make sure that everybody understood where they should be and when, and helped to reduce stress and misunderstandings. It helped to be able to give clear communication to security and to the other heads of UN agencies whenever they had questions about how many of their personnel had been received and how many were left, where their personnel had gone, whether they'd left the island or not. All of this information was absolutely key to be able to make sure that the operation ran smoothly. And it was my job to make sure that this information was collected, was accurate, and could be distributed clearly. So when we had successfully completed the evacuation of the personnel, the last stage was to make sure that they're monitored and their presence on the island was monitored, to make sure that we knew where everybody was at any given time, and to make sure that nobody left the island. It's very important in terms of safety and security to make sure that everyone was accounted for. In these kind of evacuation situations, relatives and families and friends need to know where their loved ones are, and the organization needs to know where its personnel is. We also have to make sure that the evacuation, or I had to make sure that the evacuation adhered to standard UN practices and rules and regulations. The staff rules regarding evacuations, payments and entitlements, regarding how the roles of each individual agency, which are very different and separate. I had to make sure that I was aware of these and could be able to advise the key clients, the heads of agencies and the heads of my mission accordingly. There were other important aspects to do with payments in cash and the tracking and monitoring of personnel that again was my responsibility. So I had to be systematic about what I was doing. I had to be available around the clock during this 12-hour period. I had to make sure the information I had was accurate and up to date. So I learned a lot from this experience. It was the first time that I'd ever been involved in any kind of evacuation like this. I learned a lot about the importance of making sure that there is a structure and organization that would allow results, positive results to be produced. It would have been very, very easy for things to go wrong if the personnel weren't accounted for and tracked properly, if the rules and best practices weren't followed, and it was my responsibility to make sure that all of that was in place.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.